Hey, I know chapter 5 is a beast in the NASM materials, but it doesn't have to be. And so if you haven't seen part 1 to this series, this is a full breakdown. In this part 2 video, I'm gonna give you guys everything that you need to focus on inside of chapter 5. Because truthfully, this is the challenge, right? Oh, we're upside down, is trying to figure out inside this 1,000-page textbook, what do I need to pay attention to? What do I need to focus on? So in part 1, and then also this video, part 2, I've broken down everything you need to focus on and just added a little bit of context and some easier explanations so you guys can get past this chapter and continue on with the process. Jump in the video. I hope you enjoy. Covered a lot of information on the nervous system, and it really is just an introduction to the depth of information and the complexity of the human body when it comes to the signals that we're sending and gathering. So that nervous system is one of our 3. Our skeletal system is the second piece of this overall human movement system that works together. And we don't dive into every specific aspect and fossa of the bones. You guys do have some more information inside of your materials. But as you guys see our image here on the screen, it is important that you not have every single bone in the human body memorized, although that would be great. But you definitely need to have a strong understanding of the primary bones that serve as attachment points and movement throughout the body. Meaning, I don't expect you to know every single bone of the foot. I do expect someone to know and understand how the foot and the ankle and the femur and the tibia and the fibula, they all work together, and understanding what muscles attach to certain areas. Because not only is that going to help you when it comes to passing your NASM exam, you know, having a strong understanding of bones, where they exist, their function, but I think also just as you're working with any given client, you're working with issues, injuries, compensations, just the way someone's built, you're able to visualize and understand where the anatomy is as well, all right? And so you might start to understand, you know, when someone has a certain hip structure and, you know, for some reason their foot just keeps turning out when they squat. Well, again, there's some things we're going to be able to fix. Many things when it comes to the skeletal system, it's not going to be really within our power to fix anything. But we can obviously make sure that we're putting them in the right exercises to get the most out of their body and not cause any more damage from the training we're doing. So outside of just spending some time being familiar with and memorizing some of the primary bones in the human body, what other role do the bones play, right? What do they really do? Some of it, they are a system of levers, right? They are attachment points. Because we have the system of levers, our muscles originate and insert, and when they contract, when they shorten, and when they lengthen, it allows our body to move throughout space. So they are a system of levers. And an amazing system at that allows for so much amazing, coordinated, beautiful, complex movement. They also protect primary and major organs. You can think about it like our ribs and our skull. So there's a protection element of that. And we also do have some important things that are created inside of our bones themselves, right? We have red blood cell production, which allows us to help carry oxygen throughout the human body. So they are a living, alive tissue. I think that's one thing to keep in mind as you guys are going through the material. You know, I know for me, I didn't think about it that much growing up about, you know, what bones really do. They're just there. Well, they're very alive, and they're constantly either building up or breaking down. One of the reasons why, you know, as you think about astronauts going off into space, it's very specific that they have to do certain types of training to maintain bone mineral density. Because as we're here on Earth with gravity, we have these osteoblasts and these osteoclasts inside the bones. And really, without worry about memorizing that, it's just the fact that our bone is either constantly breaking down or rebuilding based upon the stressors it's receiving, which makes sense. Your body is about survival. It's about homeostasis. So if you're getting lots of impact, lots of load-bearing activity, your body's going to want to build stronger bones. One of the reasons why many of our obese individuals, if they are on their feet and moving around, even if they're not exercising a lot, oftentimes they have some pretty good bone mineral density because there's a lot of weight that's compressing on their skeleton to, you know, force their body to remodeling and creating strong bones. But over time, right, if I'm sedentary, I'm not doing a lot of activity, or if I am someone in my 40s, 50s, 60s, as we age over time, we do have some bone loss, even more so in postmenopausal women. And so things like osteoporosis come into play. But understanding that, you know, it's all about the stressors that our body receives that's going to help create stronger bones or break those things down. And when it comes to the actual different types of bones, long bones, flat bones, irregular shapes that the textbook dives into, One rule to keep in mind, and this is just, again, evolution and adaptation of the body, form follows function. So for most things, if there is a certain shape, it is that way for a reason. Long bones, right? Think about the femur, think about the humerus. They're not meant to support a ton of stress this way, right? They're meant to support a lot of weight vertically on top of that bone. Bones like our shoulder blade, which is kind of flat and sits on the back side of our shoulder. Well, it spans a certain area, so it has lots of opportunities for muscle attachment. We've got a lot of muscles that attach in that area. So form follows function. All of them are going to be shaped for a certain reason. Again, I'm less concerned from the standpoint of you being a great coach and trainer that you have every single bone memorized and exactly what this fossa does, but I do think having a strong understanding of the major attachment points, things like radius, ulna, humerus, understanding where our scapula is, we'll look at some of the spine, is going to be really important just for you to better understand movement in general. And this image on the screen is a really important one for us to keep in mind, one that's definitely going to play a role for you long term as a coach and trainer, because so many people, 80%, probably even more than that in my experience of working with clients, are going to have some sort of back issue, some sort of low back pain at some point in time. And again, our human body is such a beautifully designed machine because it allows for so much movement, but sometimes we have weak points in the chain, and for a lot of people, the spine ends up being one of those areas. And again, outside of just NASM information, there's a really great individual out there in the health, fitness, wellness world, Dr. Stu McGill, who's kind of seen as like the father of understanding spine health and training. And the best way he ever put it that I have ever heard is thinking of your spine is it's like a swivel straw, right? Where it's got some flexibility and bend, it's meant to move, it's meant to flex, it's meant to extend laterally and rotate, all these things, but there might be a lifespan on it, right? At some point in time, if I keep doing that straw for 20 minutes, it's going to snap. Right? So the human body may only be designed for so many flexions, extensions, so many rotations. And so I think not only understanding that, but trying to make sure that we're teaching the best proper form and keeping people in safe, great positions is really important, because life is going to do enough damage to the human body. We want the gym and the training that we're doing to allow them to go experience more of life, right? To be more resilient, to be stronger. And the spine ends up being one of those areas that a lot of people do have issue with. So I think also important for us to look at these natural concave, convex curves of the spine. Right? This comes into play when we start to look at some of our common compensations or even our static postural issues like kyphosis, right? Exaggerated rounding of that, especially that thoracic into the cervical spine, forward head protrusion, or lordosis, which is going to be that excessive lumbar curvature of the spine. Right? Because the body, at least in this natural curvature, is designed to receive and accept forces in certain ways. And when we get that spine out of alignment, again, all the forces that go through the body, they may be received differently. They may alter the way that we move. All right? So I think that's the important piece to remember here. And then just looking at the number of each, the lumbar, the thoracic, the cervical vertebra, really important, because each of these vertebrae, it's a joint. Right? So when you look at the thoracic vertebra and the fact that we have the most of them, theoretically would mean we should have a lot of motion because we have a lot of joints, and that ends up being a problem area for a lot of people with posture and movement. So that'll come back into play when we get into our assessment side of things. But the spine, really important piece. Lots of clients dealing with issues, and an important one to have a great understanding with. So we already mentioned a little bit about the natural concave, convex, these spinal curves, what we call like a neutral spine position, right? Because it's never perfectly straight, as you guys can see here. This is really important because when we get into the gym, understanding in certain exercises what we're looking for, right? And knowing, being too far off of a neutral position can be damaging and detrimental. So as we just stand in this natural position that you guys see here, this would be our anatomical position. We'll keep coming back to this. This is like our frame of reference where we do have, again, we've got a little bit of curvature in the lumbar spine, a little bit in the thoracic spine, and then back up into the cervical, that natural curve. And a lot of it when we're exercising, even with things like hinging and deadlifts, is being able to maintain that and avoiding situations where all of a sudden we lose that what we call neutral position and get out of it. Now, one thing to keep in mind too is oftentimes that ends up being a coaching cue as we talk about training. I want you to maintain a neutral spine,
people might not have any idea what that means, right? They might know what it looks like, but they don't always know what it feels like. And so when we get into doing movements they're not used to, it might be easy when they're standing up, but the moment I start to change joints. So that'll be one that you'll have to be patient on and find, and we'll give you guys some great ways of giving people some external and internal cues to know what neutral spine feels like, because it will be one that people struggle with, not only with exercises like hinging, exercises like squatting, but even doing core movements on the ground where we may have more lumbar spine movement than we want. So this is just definitely one that as you start to have people train, be zeroing in and looking at, like, all right, what's going on in the spine? Do I have movement in a certain area that I don't want? And how do I problem solve that little by little? And just like we spoke on the life cycle of our nervous system and development over time, it definitely plays a role in the skeletal system as well. And you guys can see the first bullet point on here being the conversation about growth plates. And from someone who has had myself a lot of experience training younger individuals, younger athletes, especially early on in my training career, this was a common question from parents, is like, is it safe for them to be training? Because I heard that if they strength train, that it could stunt their growth plates. And like many things out there in the fitness industry, there's a lot of misinformation. And we'll talk about this in our special populations, but there's not a lot of really great research that shows that strength training at younger ages is going to cause any of those issues. But it's like everything. Obviously, if I'm strength training someone inappropriately, I'm progressing too fast, I'm focusing on loads, yeah, not only can it have an impact on injury, but potentially maybe on growth plates. You'll find, actually, funny enough, in sports even like gymnastics, you actually have a much greater impact, because we're not just talking about loading the body a little bit with weight, we're talking about impact and multiple times someone's force that's going to be compressing the body. And so I think the thing to take away from this is that as we age, obviously we do have some natural loss of bone mineral density, especially with conditions and issues like osteoporosis, women who are postmenopausal because of the hormonal impacts, but our body responds to the stressors we receive. For a lot of individuals, unfortunately, culturally, as we get older, especially into 60s, 70s, and 80s, based on where you are in the world, a lot of people just are not as active. They're not doing as much. And that might be, unfortunately, it could be because of previous injuries they don't do as much. But our body will respond well to the stresses that it receives. So doing some sort of load-bearing, even for some people, impact-based activity is a really great way to try to maintain as much bone mineral density as we can as we age.
I wanted to pop back in here real quick and let you know that, hey, if you're liking this video breakdown, maybe you've watched part 1, now you're watching part 2, and you're like, holy cow, this is so much easier than trying to study from the book, and things are clicking so much better, then just know that this is a direct clip from inside of our virtual classroom. That means video breakdowns for every single chapter in the entire NASM material, the entire curriculum, plus live video classes where I'm on teaching every single week. So if it sounds like something that you're interested in, check out the link below for more information on our virtual course, or click to jump on a call with me directly so we can figure out if you might be a good fit. Here you go, jump back in.
And the third piece of what we'll continue to refer to as our human movement system, the muscular system, the muscular system. I know this is what you came for, right? This is why we come into the gym, strength training. It's where all the results are. Obviously an important piece, but it is just one of those three. Keep that in mind. We have the neurological system, the skeletal system, and the muscular system that work together. But this will be where a lot of adaptation happens from a physical standpoint as we progress clients later on in their training programs. And when it comes to the role that the actual muscular system plays in the human body, it's a little easier to figure out, right? Primarily, it's going to help us move. It is creating joint action. There may also be some protection elements of our soft tissue, some of our organs being further underneath these other layers of muscle. But for the most part, it's all about generating force in the human body and driving movement. We do have a couple different types of muscle in the human body that are slightly different than skeletal muscle, right? So we have cardiac muscle. And it is categorized differently because the way that it contracts, some of the contractile elements are slightly different. Cardiac muscle, first off, obviously, we talked about some of our nervous system aspects. We don't want to think about it happening, so we have some automatic contraction and depolarization that happens to make our heart beat, but also the way in which it contracts. The length tension curve is slightly different, and we'll talk more about that than skeletal muscle fiber. We also have smooth muscle fiber. This is going to be more like our organs, our digestive system, where we have peristalsis that pushes things through our digestive system to get out those byproducts and toxins, and that's going to function slightly different than our skeletal system. But we'll focus primarily on the function and the role of the skeletal muscle system in the human body. As for the specifics of muscular anatomy, especially when it comes to origin, insertion, actions, where things are in the human body, you guys are going to have some additional videos throughout this course that help you to solidify a lot of this information, which I do think is extremely valuable because your mastery of human anatomy, not only is it going to allow you to come up with all the exercises you could ever think of, but it's also going to be important for you to know, hey, if I move my knee slightly one way, how might that impact the contraction of my quadriceps, my glutes, because of the mechanics in the muscles. So just know the exam itself, NASM, they're not going to put a chart up there and say label the human body, but your ability to do so will be really powerful, not only in making passing the certification, the exam much easier, but also like a superpower when it comes to working with clients, understanding what's going on in their body and helping find the right position. Because as you get more and more experience as a coach, you're going to find there are a lot of different versions of a squat, and based upon the way someone is built, the muscle alignment, all those things, it might look a little different from one person versus the next. So that piece is going to be really important for you guys, and just know that will continue to come in time. And on top of that, just understanding the different aspects of the muscle themselves, right? We think of just muscles, but we break down all these composite pieces to create these larger muscle fibers. So skeletal muscle, if you break it down, you guys can see it on here. Obviously, we have the fascia, which is more like connective tissue that creates like an outer, structure and coating around our muscles themselves. And then we break that down into smaller and smaller functional pieces, getting down into the actin and the myosin, right? From more of the macro to the micro that we'll take a look and talk about. But I think your takeaway from even just understanding the different functional components of our muscle in the image here is just knowing that it's like we've bundled together all these hundreds and thousands of smaller muscle fibers, which is great because not only does it create a lot of tensile strength rather than just having this one big muscle fiber, but it also is very much protective where if something were to get damaged. Because again, you think about it, our body is about survival. So if I had some aspect of my muscle, of my hamstring, of my quad that gets slightly damaged, I still have other pieces, I still have other muscle fibers, other bundles that can still be working and contracting unless I were to get like a complete, injury or severance of that aspect. So either way, the functional components of our muscle combining to create what we think of as our larger muscle fibers and muscle groups. When we get down into more of like the microscopic elements of our actual muscle fibers, two important, we call them myofilaments, actin and myosin. These are going to be ones that you just want to be familiar with. And what you guys will find not only in the material on actin and myosin and excitation, contraction, coupling, and sliding filament theory, it might be a little bit overwhelming, which is why we've provided you guys some really additional great videos to try to simplify this process for you guys. And even in the coming slides, don't be overwhelmed. It's more of having an understanding of overall, generally, how does muscle contraction happen in the body and what things play a role. And I do think it's going to be very valuable for you to be able to visualize and understand internally inside the muscle, what are those actin and myosin filaments and what role do they play when my brain goes to send a signal to the muscles and says, hey, contract. And again, even now you're like, okay, holy cow, what did Joe just put up on the slide, right? It can be overwhelming as we get into understanding some of the actual internal mechanisms and working of our muscle fibers. But just think of this visualization that when we are at rest, and I'm not really at rest right now because even if I'm standing, I have some amount of muscle tone. Otherwise, my body would just like jelly to the ground, right? It's got to hold my body in place. But at rest, I don't actually have a physical connection. These actin and myosin that cross over internally inside of our muscle fibers, these actin and myosin, myofibrils, they don't have a physical connection when I'm at rest. And as we'll get to further understanding things like ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is like the energy currency of the cell, we'll understand when those things are present, when I send the right signals to my body to actually cause muscle contraction, that then I get and I gain this physical contraction, all right, this physical attachment. Right now you can see that they kind of fit together, but it's this slight separation between the two, between the actin and myosin. So keep that in mind as we continue to move through this muscle contraction process. And now taking a step back, we started talking a little bit about actin and myosin, what's going on inside the muscle fibers themselves. Let's now start to relate the neurological information from the nervous system we were talking about before. So for any muscle contraction to happen, what happens is we have our somatic nervous system sending signals from the brain down to our alpha motor neurons. That was that slide we talked about, the neurons that serve our muscle fibers. That are going to tell our body to contract. So we have that neurological signal being sent through our central nervous system, through our peripheral nervous system. If I'm going to grab something to my muscles of my forearm, my hand, my shoulder, to reach and actually create that connection and pick something up. So in order for that to happen, I have activation of that nerve that's going to innervate and contract and activate that muscle fiber. But the first piece really is having those signals sent to the actual muscle fibers themselves. And the next step from here is understanding that even from our nerves, our neurological system, right? We looked at the anatomy of those nerve cells, and that there's a physical disconnect. They're not physically actually connected in the human body, but we have an electrical impulse that travels across. So what happens when we have muscle contraction is we have that nerve that is not physically attached to the muscle fibers, but what it does is when the end of our nerve is activated, right, we have that signal come down and being sent. I'm going to simplify the process massively for you guys, but we have neurotransmitters that are released in this in-between area. And for activation of muscle fibers, especially these alpha motor neurons, this is acetylcholine. And so what happens is when those neurotransmitters are released, they attach onto the muscle fibers, that acetylcholine, and they create the cascade of events that are going to follow to cause muscle contraction. So some of the videos that we've provided for you guys and some of your information inside of the NASM platform have some more detail on the sliding filament theory, on excitation contraction coupling. We want to try to keep it simple for you guys to understand that after we have that process that we discussed in the last couple of slides, signals being sent, neurotransmitters being released to have activation of those muscle fibers, what happens is as we have the cascade of events that goes on inside of the actual muscle cells themselves, what happens is we get the connection of the actin and myosin. We mentioned that earlier, that at rest there's not a physical connection. And when we have all of the right scenario, the things happening, we've got energy present inside of the cell, we have the signal that gets sent, we get that connection. Now in the simplistic world that we're going to talk about going back to our bicep curls, that means in order for me to curl a dumbbell up, I've got the signals being sent to my bicep to create contraction, enough contraction and overload to offset the weight that I have. Now what happens is those actin and myosin, it doesn't just happen once, right? They attach and they move a little bit, and then they move a little bit, and then they move a little bit. And that's a simplified version of the sliding filament theory that your material discuss, but they cross over, right? Until I get to full end range of motion. So either way, I have this shortening and this lengthening. And as long as I have the right scenario, as long as I have signals being sent, I have enough energy in the cell, my body will maintain muscle contraction. And they also talk a little bit about what the body does in order to relax and essentially to stop muscle contraction. But I do think the most important pieces of this for you guys to think about, know, and remember are the fact that muscle contraction, it's a neurologically driven process, meaning that it's not going to happen if we're not sending good signals from our body to the muscles. And then just that process in and of itself, right? Early on for people, when they first start working out, someone in their max bench press, it might go up by like 40 pounds. Well, it's probably not that they had so much change in the actual muscle fibers themselves, but what happened is that their body was getting better at activating more alpha motor neurons in the entire motor unit, meaning that early on they might not be great, the signal's not strong, their body's not used to contracting those muscles together in that pattern, and that neurologically over time it starts to happen more efficiently. So spend some time on this. Just know that not only from an exam standpoint, but even from a training standpoint, your detailed understanding of the excitation contraction coupling, I don't think is the best place for you to be spending your time, but an overall understanding of the process is going to get you a long way in just being a great coach. So one important concept for you guys to really have a comfort and grasp on is going to be the difference between type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers, all right? So you guys can see on the chart here as well, and you've probably heard this term before. It's understanding slow versus fast twitch. Slow twitch muscle fibers, oftentimes we can relate to more endurance-based training. Someone who's training for a half marathon, a marathon, more longer distance, slightly lower intensity, extended duration activity, we're going to rely more on a predominance of our slow twitch, our type 1 muscle fibers, all right? But it also comes into play even as we're just moving around the world. More of our slow twitch muscle fibers also tend to act as postural muscles. So for example, as I think about just carrying myself around in a good position all day long as I'm going throughout the world, a lot of those core core muscles, those stabilizers, those are going to be more type 1 muscle fibers because I don't want them to fatigue quickly. They may not need to generate massive power all at once. So they're going to function more that way. And then obviously, as I train a certain way, as we get later on in life, we don't really have what we call hyperplasia, which is the creation of new muscle fibers, at least not significantly. We more have hypertrophy, which means we can adapt muscle fibers to be more like one or the other, all right, especially as we look type 1 and type 2. There's actually a lot more subclassifications that over time they've come up with, but from a simplistic standpoint, slow twitch and fast twitch. Fast twitch is going to be more, higher level or more explosive strength training, sprint work, that type of stuff. And we can see physically, we'll usually see a difference. There's that really well-known image of like the marathon runner versus the sprinter, all right? You can still train. Even someone who is genetically predisposed to be much more fast twitch, they can still train to be slightly more aerobic. But rather than change a type 1 to a type 2, generally what's going to happen is the capacities will change a little bit, meaning that if they train enough endurance that over time their muscles will generate more mitochondria, which is the aerobic energy producers. They'll be able to sustain more, longer duration muscle contraction, but they might lose some of that force production capability. So there's definitely the trainability effect between those two. There is our genetic predisposition, and obviously at a certain stage of life where we're no longer creating new muscle fibers and new cells, we're kind of stuck with what we got. But just knowing that too, obviously the certain type of training that we do is going to lend itself more to either type 1 or type 2 muscle fiber development. If someone wants to get more stronger, more powerful, you're going to find probably more type 2 training, but it's never just one or the other. They're going to cross over and work together, and even certain muscles, they still have the capacity to do both, and it just might be slightly more slow twitch or fast twitch dominant when it comes to muscle fiber types. And we talked a little bit about the life cycle of our nervous system and our skeletal system, and the muscular system is definitely an important one as well. Sarcopenia, which is muscle loss as we age, is actually a huge issue. You could look at it from even like an economic issue of being able to maintain the strength and muscle mass to, go through daily life without help as we get older. And again, although some individuals may experience greater levels of that, even certain disease states may cause more muscle loss, not using atrophy, all those things. Maintaining an active, healthy lifestyle and strength training as we age can be a huge, huge preventer of this type of muscle loss. You guys see some information on here, peak muscle mass, peak, optimal muscle gain periods throughout life, and a lot of that's due to hormones and other things too for men, especially 20s into 30s, peak and optimal opportunity to build muscle fiber. But we can definitely maintain it as we age, and that's one of the great ways that people can work with you as a coach and trainer to do that type of stuff. And I find oftentimes for a lot of people, especially later stages of life, strength training is something they're not as confident and comfortable in. Getting on some cardiovascular equipment, maintaining heart health, very important, very valuable, and many times more comfortable for some people. So I really think this is a place you can play a big impact. So once again, a lot of information packed into this chapter in understanding the nervous system, the skeletal system, and the muscular system. And this is one that it's going to continue to build on some of the topics that we introduced you guys to already within the OPT model, within these chapters, and within this information. It's only going to continue to build into your understanding, and repetition, because it's just going to take time when it comes to the muscular anatomy, knowing where my gastroc is, and my pectoralis major, and my triceps brachii. So it's going to take time, repetition, probably flashcards for a lot of you guys as well. But the main stuff that we'd covered in this chapter, really, really circling around, knowing and understanding that these three systems work together, and that as a coach and trainer, especially when we get further down into our assessments and just understanding how our clients move, having a good working knowledge of the nervous system, the skeletal system, and the muscular system is going to give us better ideas of why they're doing what they're doing and how we can help them move better.